like to remind everyone that if you have a question while they are speaking, that Fred will be collecting along with Fabiana right over here in the front. You can just raise your hand from time to time. They will check on you to see if you have questions, so the questions can be addressed and answered throughout the talk.
So let's welcome Fred, Jussara, and Alexandra.
So, hello everyone. While I was listening to the beautiful music that Abigail brought to us, I was thinking that probably John Lennon wrote this song for us today here at this symposium, because all the words of John Lennon resonate so much today, and especially with the topics that we were talking about, as, for example, peace, how much peace we need. In this part of our symposium is when we have our workshops. What are the aim of this workshop? Is actually to empower, to help Spiritist centers and Spiritist disseminators to deal, to expand even more their knowledge on certain subjects that we think it is very important for us in our Spiritist centers. So today we have two workshops, as always. We have one that will be helping people who wants to be establishing Spiritist studies for youth, children and youth, and this one where we are going to be talking about sex and sexuality. Why have we decided to bring this topic? As you may imagine, it's a very controversial topic. It's very hard for us to, at a personal level, even to talk among friends in relation to sex. But we understand, and sexuality, we understand that today we could say that this is one of the main reasons for imbalances and problems that we may face within ourselves. And we do not find many people or places where we will feel comfortable to talk about it. Who among us here, for instance, have not at some point faced some worries about our own sexuality? Good for you, Fred. But so when we think about problems related to marital life, infertility, impotence, sexual choices, pornography, sexual addictions. So those are problems that people are going to be bringing to our Spiritist Center. And if one thing we have to learn as a Spiritist is to embrace each and every one and never judge the problems that people are going to be bringing to us. So we have to start from the Spiritist centers, the Spiritist institution, to welcome, to embrace, and to help in any way we can people that are facing problems or doubts or have questions in relation to their own sexuality, or people that are around them. It can be a mother, a father that is facing difficult situations in their homes, or different, not to say difficult, that they are not so sure how to deal with. And when we talk about it, regardless of the nature of sexual problems we may be facing ourselves, because we don't have many people to talk to, we don't feel, like I said, even comfortable sometimes to talk with our own family. So we don't have the support of the family, we don't have the support of society, and many times, what's even worse, we don't have the support from our faith. And it's when, in despair, we will see a great number of suicides due to the lack of support, spiritual, religious support as well. So this is the reason why we have decided to bring this topic today, to bring more awareness to ourselves, to our behaviors. How do we deal with that in the Spiritist Center? We will be dividing our workshop in two parts. The first part will be Alexandra and myself talking, giving an introduction to the topics that we would like to be expanding. And then Fred is going to join us, and we will be having a session of Q&A. Please feel free to write your questions while we are giving the talks, and give the questions to Fred. And that is when we are going to be having a more active participation. Since we are talking about sexuality and the psychology of life from the Spiritist perspective, of course, we did our due diligence, and we went to look for resources. We did our research using literature from the Spiritist movement. Of course, starting with the Spirit's book and the books from the Spirit, Andrea Lewis, Emmanuel, that we have several that enlightens us in relation to sexuality. Also, we use the books from Divaldo Pereira Franco, including one that is called Sex and Consciousness, that is, I think, like about 600, 700 pages from messages that were collected from several books from the Spirit Joana de Angelis, Manuel Filomeno de Miranda, and also from our dear friend Andrei Moreira, that has the book Homosexuality and Transgender that is currently being translated. So we are going to be starting by mentioning those excerpts from those books, because it's important for us to set the basis for our conversation. So let us start. I thought I was going to have a monitor here. I cannot see what is down there, so just a minute, please. We will start with the Spirit's book, with the questions that we have in the Spirit books. Do spirits have sex? The answer is not as you understand sex. For sex, in that sense, depends on the corporeal organization. Love and sympathy exist among them, but founded on similarity of sentiments. So if we think that, and I know there are literature that even mentions sex among spirits, this is not the case, because this is not necessarily what the Spirit is aiming to. We are talking here about, like the Spirit's book mentioned, about a communion of love and sympathy that exists among a spirit. And the second question, can a spirit who has animated the body of a man animate the body of a woman in a new existence, and vice versa? The answer, yes, the same spirits animate men and women. This is a very well-known concept to us. We will come through several reincarnations using the clothing, the envelope that is our physical body, according to the tasks we have set ourselves to perform. So perhaps in a certain incarnation, it's going to be better for me to reincarnate having a female body. In another incarnation, a male body. So this goes like this. Does a spirit, when existing in the spirit world, prefer to be incarnate as a man or as a woman? It matters little to a spirit. It depends on the trials it must undergo in its new corporeal life. Well, my 2 cents on that is, it may matter little to the spirit, but I wish I can be born as a man next incarnation. It can make my life easier, you know. You still have a long way to go to see equality. Kardec's comments, so my husband will have to come as a female. we have a deal among ourselves, is 50 years. So if we don't have the 50 years together, in this incarnation, we have to continue in the next one. Kardec's comment: spirits incarnate themselves as man or as a woman because they are of no sex, and as it is necessary for them to develop themselves in every direction, both sexes, as well as every variety of social position, furnish them with special trials and duties, and with the opportunity of acquiring experience. What is very important for us, and why we are mentioning that, because like we said, this is a very difficult subject, and we want to make sure that we are starting with the Spiritist basis. And we will see how much Kardec was a visionary, the representation of an enlightened spirit when he comments, when he asks questions, and even when he makes comments, as we will see in this next slide, that it is we are bringing excerpts from the Spiritist Review of 1866 that Kardec wrote. And here we see first, it may occur that the spirit goes through a series of existence in the same sex, which means that for a long time it may retain in the state of spirit the aspect of man or women whose marks have remained with it. It is only upon a certain degree of advancement and the materialization that the influence of matter is completely extinguished, and with it the aspect of the sexes. So, as we see, upon returning to the spirit realm, we will still retain in our spiritual body the characteristics of male or female that we had in the last incarnation. Only when we advance more is when we are going to be seeing the differences disappear. It's something that is very hard for us to imagine because it's very far from our understanding. But it's important to know and to see that in 1866, Kardec was already mentioning that, about the transcendency of spirits in relation to the matter and how we actually see ourselves the more we evolve. And he goes on saying, those who present themselves to us as men or as women do so to remind us of the existence in which we knew them. If this influence reflects from the corporeal life onto the spiritual life, the same happens when the spirit goes from spiritual life back to physical life. In a new incarnation, it will bring the aspects of an inclination it had as a spirit. By changing biological sex, it could therefore, under the impression and on its new incarnation, retain the tastes, tendencies, and character inherent to the sex it had just left. This explains some apparent anomalies which are noted in the aspects of certain men and certain women. Sorry. So here, what Kardec is telling us is that when we have a communication from spirits and they appear or talk to us as female or male, it's just because they are still presenting themselves in this way in the spirit realm. But when it comes to the point where they have to reincarnate, after having had several reincarnations in the same gender, maybe they will have a difficulty to adapt. They will show their tendencies, their tastes more in accordance to how they were used. And this is how sometimes, the body not necessarily represents what we see in the soul. Those are words of Kardec. Those are not our words. And this is the reason why we thought, because of everything that we are going to be discussing here, it was very important for us to keep that in mind. In a word, sexuality is neutral. It's not good or bad. The thing is, how are we going to present ourselves? How are we going to be behaving when we are talking about sexuality? Are we going to be irresponsible, not caring about how we treat others, how we deal with our sexuality? Or are we going to be responsible in the sense of understanding that sexuality is life, is the origin of life itself? It's completely related to love, to this kind of love that we do not yet understand. We talk normally about love more from a material perspective, more in the senses of the union of the physicality, of the physical bodies. But here, when the spirits talk about love, when they are talking about the union of two souls, they are going beyond their physicality. And this is why when the spirits, they talk about sexuality, they have no problem in dealing with that. We know that nowadays, still today, it is considered a taboo or even sinful to talk about sexuality in many places. But this is why it is so important for us to bring this to our Spiritist center. So according to the Spirit Emmanuel, sex is not only a respectable attribute, but also profoundly holy in its nature. So what are we doing with sex and our sexuality that we don't feel that? We don't feel that it's profoundly holy in nature. Okay. Also, according to Emmanuel, sex is divine potential, procreative force, gateway to reincarnation, love, life, energy, power of creation, physical, mental, and spiritual pleasure. And it is fundamental to the universal life. It is in the origins of life itself, which emanates from the Creator. And our friend Alexandra, she has prepared a series of slides, and we are using this one that she has prepared when we talk about sex plus love equals health. So it is valuing sex for the experience of being with the other and for the exchange of affection in that relationship, regardless of sexual orientation. It is giving due importance to the fact that we all need to be accepted by family, friends, and the community in which we live so that we can freely express our nature in a healthy way. It is understanding the universe from our viewpoint and also the viewpoint of others and respect each one as a valid way to learn love. So when we are capable of combining all of that, this is when we are going to be able to live the experience that means sex, love, and consequently, spiritual and physical health. So write your questions down. Okay. So here in the book Sex and Consciousness that we mentioned before, Divaldo Franco says, sex, like any other biological function, has a primary purpose, which is the continuity of life. And during the intimacy of a loving couple, sexual bioenergy penetrates intensely into the body. There is a flow of bioenergy from outside to inside, from the absorbed psychic emanation of the partner, and another from inside to outside, which originates in this individual's own orgasm. The two streams of energy exert on the couple a therapeutic effect emanating through the organs and producing health, all thanks to the miracle of love. So this, is actually the way we should visualize when we are having a relationship, a sexual relationship with our partners. The exchange of emotional vibration. And of course, you can only experience that if you are having a relationship out of love. if you're just having a casual relationship, you will not be having the most important part of the sexual relationship. It's like, going to an ice cream parlor, asking for an ice cream. There is a cherry on the top of the sundae you ask it, the ice cream you ask it, and you just have the cherry. What is more important? I would go for the ice cream, not the cherry, if I had to choose. So this is the same thing here. So we get there's so much more when there is emotion, when there is love involved. And also, he goes on by saying, in this case, Emmanuel, sex is a spirit and life at the service of happiness and harmony of the universe. It demands responsibility and discernment. All commitments in the sexual life are equally subordinated to the law of cause and effect, and in everything we give to another in the field of affections, also another will give with us. So here we come with this very important concept that we have in Spiritism, that is law of cause and effect. We cannot imagine that we can go out about our lives just abusing others. And especially when we are talking about a sexual relationship. We will have responsibility, we will have to account for how we treated others in terms of their emotion and their psychological aspects. So as the individual evolves, one comes to understand that sexual energy implies the need of discernment and responsibility in its application, and for this reason, it should be guided by moral values. What are we talking about here? It's not about cultural moral values, it's about doing no harm to self or others. Sexual abuse, power, manipulation, infidelity, pedophilia, and all of those things. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I forgot to put this slide. And just to talk about sexual energy, to understand a bit more of what we were talking about before, our sex energy is our life force. It is a creative energy. So we always hear the spirits, the highly evolved spirits, talking about the creative force of sexuality, that not necessarily need to be guided to sexual relationships, but can be directed to great works that you can do to humanity. In all fields of life, it can be in the religious field, in the scientific field. When you create something, it's the creation that we are all capable of. That is what explains sometimes, when we talk about composers, that I remember Fred once giving a talk, I think Mahler stayed 2 or 3 days in his room without even eating, because he was nourishing himself with this sexual energy, with this creation that comes and goes as we need. One thing that is important for us to mention here as well is that reproduction is not the only goal of sex. And Andrea Lewis in the book Evolution in Two Worlds, he say, above all, it is the restorative agent of spiritual energies, with which incarnate and discarnate individuals mutually nourish themselves in the exchange of psychical magnetic waves necessary for their progress. So the question now that we have is, if we decide to give up on sex, are we going to reach spiritual perfection? If you reply yes, I have to start all over again. Of course not, right? It's not about giving up something, because, we still have this concept, oh, it's dirty, it's something bad, that we have been bringing with us from millennia. It has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with how we are going to be nourishing our souls through this beautiful way that God has given to us, that for the moment, yes, also plays the important role in terms of procreation and continued life. But let's see what Emmanuel says here. So he says, it is preposterous to subtract the manifestations of sex among human beings, alleging elevation, because the suggestions of eroticism penetrates the structure of the soul. So if we are trying to impose something on us, we are not going to succeed. And finally, he says, similarly, it would be absurd to move sex away from its venerable position in order to throw it in less worthy adventures under the intention of freedom. So let's see and pay attention to these words of Emmanuel. We cannot move sex, it's absurd to move sex away from its venerable position. So if a spirit like Emmanuel is talking about sexuality in this way, why can't we not bring this kind of subject to our Spiritist centers? So now my colleague, Alexandra Azevedo, is going to continue with more interesting topics for us to discuss later.
Thank you, Jussara, and thank you, everyone. Hello. So, we're going to see a little bit more of Emmanuel and what he said. Okay, let me change the slide. Okay, so in the book Life and Sex, Emmanuel says that sexual orientation in itself does not determine a person's level of evolution, nor this person's future spiritual condition, but sexual behavioral does. So he's talking about the misuse of sex, okay? This is about harm to self or others, okay? This is not about loving sex that produces that healthy sexual energy. And then he also explains that the spirit can take a male or female body to perform duties in a particular area and or to perform regenerative obligations. Also, cultured and sensitive spirits aspiring to perform specific tasks among people to evolve ask the instructors of the greater life, who assist them in the physical field, to come dressed in a carnal envelope that is different to their psychological structure. So let's take the words here, carnal envelope. This is about the body, and psychological structure, talking about the mind. Okay? So for spiritual evolution, we integrate body and mind. So the mismatch creates specific trials for that specific incarnation. Okay, and then he says, homosexuality cannot be explained in studies that only take into consideration a materialistic approach, but is perfectly understandable in the light of reincarnation. This phenomenon grows with the development of humankind, requiring attention and respect. So the focus here is not on the body, on the matter. We have to take the immortal spirit viewpoint. Humankind develops and polarities integrate. So the opportunity to incarnate with mismatching body and mind increases. And it's important to notice that he claims here for attention and respect. Okay, and Emmanuel concludes by saying, Earth companions, in the face of all complications and sex problems, abstain from judgment and condemnation. Many of our imaginary errors are right ways towards good, while many of our hypothetical successes are trials towards evil that we will rid ourselves one day. It's clear-cut here. Abstain from judgment and condemnation. It's not our role to do that. Okay? Our trials lead to spiritual evolution. They lead to the good. Okay, so we're gonna take a look at what social science tells us. Some of you may be familiarized with the gingerbread figure, genderbread person, I'm sorry, gingerbread. It's that inspiration. Okay, so we're going to start with the biological sex. What is biological sex? I can't read from here what it says, so I don't know if you guys can read the slide. So I'm going to have to move a little bit and explain. Anyway, biological sex, thank you, Fred. Thank you so much. So what it says in this slide is biological sex refers to the objectively measurable organs, hormones, and chromosomes. So this is about the genitals, okay, and our phenotype, our appearance. So, okay, yeah, can you hear me? Yeah. Biological sex is what we have here, okay? So females have vaginas, vulva, males have testicles and penis, and internally we have, females have uterus, males have vesicle, don't remember the name exactly, but anyway. This is about what it is about, our body, okay? And then we have gender identity. So we have biological sex here, gender identity here. What is gender identity? What does it say there? It says it's how you, in your head, think about yourself. It's the chemistry that compasses you, hormonal levels, and how you interpret and what that means. So, gender identity is what you have in your mind. It's how you feel that you are. So, biological here, gender identity here. Okay? And then we have gender expression, which is, I just want to read so we're on the same page. Gender expression is how you demonstrate your gender based on traditional gender through the ways you act, dress, behave, and interact. So this is about how we present ourselves. That presentation can be more of a feminine presentation or a masculine presentation or something in between somewhere. So we have, sometimes we have the voice of the person or how the person uses the hands, how the person sits. We have more sensitive spirits that can express more of one gender than the other, despite being less male or female as a person, as the gender, regarding to the gender identity. So when we have that thing, so what are we talking about now to make it very clear? Biological sex here, gender identity here. So here we can be a woman, a man, or something in between, okay? And we have gender expression, how we dress, how we act, how we present ourselves socially, right? And then we have sexual orientation, and that's how people get confused about gender expression and sexual orientation. Sexual orientation is who we feel attracted to. So, if my gender identity and my biological sex are matching, they are the same. So I was born with a female part and I have gender identity as a female, and I feel attracted to someone who has the same gender identity, I'm a homosexual person. If I'm feeling attraction to someone who has a different biological sex and different gender identity, I'm a heterosexual person. Okay? If I'm attracted to both, to either someone with the same gender identity or the different gender identity, I'm a bisexual person. But it doesn't end there, because we can feel attracted to someone just because we feel attracted to that specific person. It has nothing to do with gender identity. It has more to do with being attracted to that soul, to that person, regardless of the gender identity. And that's called pansexual. And when does that happen? That happens when, that's probably the closest thing we have to this spiritual encounter between people. That can be something very occasional, or like, for example, there's a case of this person that she was married and had kids, and she met this woman, and she fell in love, and she left the family, the kids, and she went to, with this person to live this relationship. But she never felt as a lesbian. And then after they resolved whatever they had to resolve in this life, they separated, and this person is again, in relationship with men. So she was not a lesbian, she just had a relationship specific with this specific person. So that's what pansexual means. Okay, so, we create all these categories, but what really matters is love, as Jussara was saying, And why does it matter? It matters so then we don't create an unbalanced sexual energy. Okay, so if we get stuck in the gender expression, then we are at the risk of creating this unbalanced sexual energy. All right, so here we have the transgender individuals. Now, when we talk about transgender, we are talking about people who have one gender identity that doesn't match with the biological sex, okay, regardless of the gender expression. So these are people who are born with one kind of genitals and were assigned at birth as male or female, but they don't feel like male or female. Okay? They feel that they are different than what the genitals say. And that can be anything in between. It doesn't have to be, I feel like a man or I feel like a woman. I can be anywhere in this spectrum, right? So gender can be fluid. It can go anywhere, or it can be fixed. So the person can feel, well, I'm more of a man, but not completely. Or the person can feel, wow, for some things I'm more like a man, for other things I'm more like a woman. So that's fluid, it's not fixed. Terms are very important when we're talking about transgender, so we don't refer to people as a transgender, we refer to transgender person, a transgender man, or a trans man, a trans woman. Okay? Like we don't say, oh, the tall. We say the tall man, the tall woman. So same thing here. And terms vary a lot. It's kind of hard sometimes to keep up with everything that is going on, but it's very important to focus and respect that. So gender identity is not imposed and cannot be influenced. Okay? It doesn't change. The person feels what the person feels, right? The person knows. It's not an option either, right? The person doesn't choose to be a transgender person. The person, why would someone choose to be rejected by the family, to lose the job, and, to face violence, to be part of a population that has the highest risk of suicide among minorities? It's a trial of self-acceptance for the person who is a transgender, and for the people in that network, the person's network, the group, the families, the co-workers, the religious group. So it's not something to be seen as isolated. It's a trial for everyone involved. Humankind is developing, integrating polarities, as we said. So we are integrating into an integral being. Trans people will be incorporated to the culture, just like we incorporated single moms, divorce, women's right to vote. It's just part of what we have to learn, to accept, to live with. Okay? And something else will come for us to challenge us again. And then we have, last but not least, we have some. It didn't go? Oh, okay. We have again Emmanuel teaching us a few more lessons. So Emmanuel says, not prohibition, but education. Education is the purpose of incarnation. We have to remember that. We're here to learn. Not abstinence, but use with dignity and respect to the other. This is about not doing any harm to self or others. No abuse. Not indiscipline, but control. This is about seeking balance, harmony, and not misuse sex. And he also says, not free impulse, but responsibility. This is about doing it with love and for love. So nothing here today claims with whom we should be having sex. Only that we have to learn to use this beautiful and powerful tool that brings us closer to God. Thank you.
Fred. 25 minutos.
Thank you, Ju. Thank you, Ale. We have received 3 questions from the audience, and I'm going to start with the one that I think is easiest to answer, and I'll open it to both of you. The question says, is it possible that a spirit comes here as a woman or a man because of the energy that is needed for that person as a mother or as a father energy? So if I understand the question correctly, the question is asking, is it possible that a spirit comes here in the body of a woman or a man because they need to experience fatherhood and motherhood and the energy associated with that? Is that correct? Rihanna asked the question, so if she wrote her name, I'm going to call her. Huh? From the Facebook, thank you. So that's what I understood the question to be.
Of course, when we reincarnate, as we said before, we are going to be choosing our gender, perhaps, in ways that we can reach our goal. What is my goal? Is my goal perhaps to experience motherhood, and then it's important for me to go to the experience of having a child or more than one child. So it's perfectly possible that for whatever reason that we have committed ourselves due to previous incarnations, to ways we have acted. Let's say that we are talking about someone that in the past, 18th century, 19th century, was someone that used it to perform abortions. Now, it is either a male or a female, okay, just performing the abortions. Now, because they have to understand how sacred it is, maternity, to bring a child to the world, they will volunteer to come and have, I don't know, 6 children, 7 children, just because they will take this opportunity to see how important it is to let a spirit have the opportunity of reincarnating in order to evolve spiritually speaking. So it's perfectly understandable that in this sense, we will be reincarnating, as like we said, in a female body, in a male body, according to the places that we are going to be acting. And in this sense, in terms of motherhood or fatherhood, we will have the same experience, the same possibilities of growing and understanding more the importance of fatherhood, motherhood.
So I like this question here, which I think is a common answer we could all identify with. If it's all about love, shouldn't we all be pansexual and forget about all these categories, homosexual, heterosexual? In other words, is about the person, spirit, that we ultimately fall in love with?
Okay, we have to understand that so far, here? Closer, better? Okay. So far, for our evolution, socially speaking, we needed to organize ourselves as male and females. And, we were in the past cavemen, so, we need the man with the muscles and everything to, go hunt, and the woman would be taking care of the babies at home. But we are evolving and we are integrating these polarities. So does it mean that now we just throw everything? And no, that's not what it means, because we feel what we feel. And that's what we have to respect. Okay? So we are talking about acceptance of changes that are already being presented to us. This is not about revolutionizing who we are or how we live. This is about being able to open our hearts and understand the present moment, because we have to put everything in context. Okay? What we needed before is not what we will need. So we are changing.
And if I could add to that too, it's many times when Kardec is asking the spirits for some clarifications, and he asks the spirit, well then, shouldn't I understand this like this? And he attributes a name or a label. And many times the spirits answer, call it what you want, as long as you understand the essence of the teaching. And I feel that ultimately, once we've internalized these labels, they're going to fall away as we evolve and understand them. I think for now, in order for us to distinguish and understand them more, we have to create all of these labels, but I think ultimately they're not going to be needed.
Because we organize our society in norms and laws. So we create rules, regulations, and we create categories that we can, because we need that structure.
There's a question here that asks, can you give some examples of common sexual problems that most people are not aware of, and that Spiritism suggests us, and what Spiritism suggests us to do about this problem? So I'll repeat the question. Can you give us some examples of common sexual problems that most people are not aware of, and what Spiritism suggests us to do about this problem?
Okay, well, common sexual problems. I'm a therapist, a psychotherapist, so I'm training to be a sex therapist. So I see a lot of different issues that were brought to my office, from infertility to erectile dysfunction, premature ejaculation. So I think the question is about this, right? We have sexual abuse. It's a big one, much bigger than we can imagine, because it's hidden behind closed doors usually. and that's a common one too. And so, on the Spiritism perspective, did I miss anything? Infertility, infidelity is also one that is very common. We always think that we are here to learn, we incarnate to learn and evolve. And we are being exposed to exactly the challenges we need to be exposed to. Nothing is by chance. So when a relationship is facing a challenge, any of these challenges, it has to be resolved. So it can be resolved either as a couple or individually. It depends. It depends on the strength of that relationship. So if we think from an immortal spiritual viewpoint that if I don't put my hands on it now, this will come back, this is the time to take action. Anything to add?
Well, these are all the questions that we've received. One thing that comes to mind regarding sexual problems that you mentioned, Alexandra, regarding erectile dysfunction, premature ejaculation, and all these other problems, a lot of them have to do with our sexual conduct, not necessarily our orientation or our gender identity, because those two, as you've explained, they are who the spirit is and feels inside, regardless of how they carry out and interact with other people, right? So when we are examining how can Spiritism contribute to clarifying this matter, I think that most of it has to do to the sexual behavior, how I'm actively carrying out my sexual energy, and what habits am I incorporating in my daily life that is stimulating that sexual energy in a healthy way or in an unhealthy way. And that's when we see spiritual influences come in, the phenomenon of vampirism and addictions to pornography, which today in our society are a huge problem. I've read some statistics before coming here to prepare for this workshop that say that more than half of all divorces in the United States have a component of sex addiction by one of the spouses. That the relationship actually ended because one of the spouses became addicted to internet pornography and they lost interest in the partner. They stopped having sex, a healthy, love-making relationship, because the allure of the exposure to the internet pornography, which is just a few clicks away to anyone, became so much more intense and satisfying for that person. Let's call it the spirit, since we're talking about the immortal spirit. But that's a relationship of dependence. Often there is a very big element of spiritual influence behind this act, especially if the person loses the control of the ability, right? If we're letting the sexual energy take control of us, and instead of us channeling that sexual energy through creative purposes, through nourishing ourselves in a healthy way, and the balance. What is balance? That's individually for each spirit's conscience to choose. For some people, it may be X number of days per week. For others, it might be, who knows? And that goes back to people's individual amount of sexual energy, right? So for us to be mindful that the Spiritist Center is a place that can welcome people in the fraternal assistance, like Jussara was saying, who may be going through this. And for us as the coordinators, practitioners, volunteers, to have a total open mind. And Emmanuel, Joana de Angelis uses a word here which I think is key to illustrate this. Spontaneity. To have spontaneity to deal with this. How do we achieve this spontaneity? Is by eliminating the taboos, the fears, and the reservations we have with the topic, because the topic is loaded with judgment, with self-loathing, and that speaks to not only the religious institutions and the habits we've created in these organizations in previous lives, but of course, let's face it, nobody's an angel here, and as Haroldo jokes, if there is any angel here that I've offended, I apologize, but we're all learning how to tame, how to master this sexual energy and purify it in the way we express it and not animalize it, which is what unfortunately is very common today with the advent of the internet. So when we go back to talking to children, how can we educate the teenagers about sex education? The majority of the time, in the midst of the families, the conversations are not happening because of fear, because of how do I talk to my child about this? When is it too early to talk about it? Is it too late? Meanwhile, the children in school and with their friends are already exposing themselves to very heavy material on the internet, which has become their education. Unfortunately, they're being educated by that exposure. So for us as parents and Spiritist educators to facilitate the dialogue to come from the children in a spontaneous way that they feel embraced, in a way that we can talk about it so naturally.
One thing that actually we can think as our main objective here today in talking about this sexuality is for us to review our behavior in the Spiritist centers and institutions, to review our concepts, to understand that if we are actually aiming to be those, fraternal people, embracing people regardless of their diversity, of whatever nature, it's time for us to also start bringing this topic to the Spiritist Center, to educators, to people that are, in front of the main activities of the Spiritist Center. You see, this is a topic that very rarely we will see be addressed in Spiritist congresses. There are, I guess, less than half a dozen spiritists that will talk about sexuality in a way that they can actually enlighten us. Of course, one of them being Divaldo Franco, and another one that comes to mind is Alberto Almeida. So it is something that we have to think about more, because like Fred has just said, if we do not do that in terms of this orientation in our community, and even including our youth, they are going to be learning from a different perspective. So this is what we wanted to bring to you today, is this awareness, how you behave, how you actually accept people that will come in a different way. If a homeless come, how are you going to be looking for the homeless? If we are talking about a transgender person, how are you going to react seeing a transgender person? And for us to wrap up our conversation today, because we have started later, we're trying to catch up with the time, we would like to ask Alexandra, because she has a personal story to tell us, and we will finish with that, if it's okay with you, Alexandra.
Yes, well, just before I go into my personal experience, I would like to add to this that it's very hard, that first step to resolve whatever it is to admit that there is a problem, that there is a situation going on. And that can be very hard for the person. So if the person takes all that courage to face it and doesn't find on the other side, if that's in the Spiritist Center, someone who embraces and welcomes that, then, it's a wasted opportunity and it causes more harm. So everything that we said here today is about doing no harm to self and others. Because we come from a culture that represses any expression of sexuality. So we tend to understand sexuality as something that deviates into something that cannot be good, because we don't know how to deal with it. We have to learn, we have to educate ourselves, so we can understand ourselves and open to receive people who need that too. Okay? We're here today because we're interested in growing and learning. And this is an open door for that. So, regarding my personal experience, so as a therapist, I was working I got a job at an office, a clinic, where they are LGBT affirmative, and I had to do a lot of training and working with transgender people. So I learned a lot about working with them. A little after that, my son shared that he is a transgender. So I got even more interested in getting more training, because I felt that really the mercy of God prepared me by educating me to have that experience at home. So I went to get some training to become certified as a transgender care therapist. And there, the doors opened to an opportunity to get a doctorate in clinical sexology. And that's when I understood that, God had a much bigger plan, put a purpose and more responsibility on my hands to speak to people, educate people beyond my practice, my clinical practice. That's it.
So, thank you, Alexandra. Thank you, Fred. Thank you all for, participating. Of course, there is a lot more that we could be talking about the subject, but this is just the beginning, and we hope that in future symposiums we can bring more specific topics. And you have your surveys. If you wanted to suggest something, please do so, because we can always keep that in mind and continue in this path as well, because it's so necessary for us. Thank you so much.